Hi everyone. So people asked me for reading videos and I didn't know what to read. I think I mentioned that in one of the videos, but I found this silly stories book from, I think this was my brother's one, and I had a princess book or something probably. So I found this back from when we were little, and I've not actually looked at any of the stories yet because we all know that Jade doesn't do planning. So yeah, I thought I would read those stories because they aren't very complex and you can just let your imagination, if you still have one, run wild. And this must have been my brother's because in all the books that I got, I always used to write on the little "this book belongs to" page. Always. And then I always used to get so annoyed with myself because my handwriting was so bad. Yeah. So I think I want to read. We have Dent Your Adventure, Silly Jill, The Bank Manager's Boring Birthday, King Pong, Daft and Dafter, The Sensible Tax, The Queen Who Hated Animals, The Flying Contest, and The Dog That Couldn't Bark. So I think I want to go for the dog who couldn't bark, rather. It doesn't actually give me a page number, which isn't very helpful. Here we go. The illustrations are pretty cute though. Ben gazed into a pair of large brown eyes, and the large brown eyes gazed back. It was a good face, friendly and intelligent, the sort of face that promised fun. Ben liked it immediately. Even though there were 7 puppies to choose from, Ben knew that the little brown and white one with the funny ears and curly tail was the one for him. The puppy began to chase round and round in circles. Then he rolled over a couple of times as Ben looked on in amusement and admiration. "I think I like this one best," announced Ben as the puppy grabbed the sleeve of his jacket and began to tug at it playfully. Ben's dad frowned. As well as being by far the smallest of the litter, the puppy had a floppy ear that fell over his eye, whilst the other stuck up straight in the air, and his tail curled round and round just like a pig's. "He's rather small," Ben's dad pointed out, and the little puppy doubled his height by standing on his back legs and springing around the kitchen as if he were on a pogo stick. "Please," said Ben, as the puppy jumped up and tried to nibble his nose. "Okay." "Oh, very well," agreed Ben's dad, seeing that the two were already inseparable. "But he has to be a guard dog, not just a pet." The puppy bared his teeth. Is it bared? Barred? Bared? Let's go bared. Bared his teeth and made the most fearsome and ferocious face he could. "Oh, look," said Ben, giggling. "He's smiling." "Has he got a good bark?" asked Ben's dad, writing out a cheque and handing it over to Mrs. Walker, the lady selling the pups. She smiled broadly. "Well, that's the oddest thing. He doesn't bark at all. I don't think he can." Ben's dad was still shaking his head by the time the 3 of them arrived home. "A 6-inch high guard dog with a ridiculous tail, a floppy ear, and no bark," he complained to Ben's mum, as she watched Ben, his new best friend, race around the garden. "Well, Ben certainly seems to like him," she remarked, and Ben certainly did. It didn't take long for the new puppy to settle in. Ben gave him the name Jake, which sort of suited him. Jake was having the time of his life, a splendid new basket, a smart tartan collar with his name on it, an enormous garden, and a wonderful family. He He tried very hard to please them all, in particular Ben's dad. He handed him the hammer when he was fixing the "Beware of the Dog" sign to the gate. He hadn't meant to drop it on his toe, of course, but it was rather heavy for a small dog. He also helped in the garden, doing lots of digging and rearranging the flower beds. After that, Ben's dad had been so delighted that he had to shut Jake in the back porch so he could have a lovely long rest in his basket. Digging was hard work, especially when you only had short legs. And Jake did so love his basket. But as the weeks rolled by and winter approached, it occurred to him that he might be warmer and even more comfortable if he took his splendid grey blanket and laid it on the sofa in the lounge. After all, Ben's dad spent many a happy hour there. It wasn't easy dragging the heavy blanket down the hall, but eventually he managed just in time to see two men climbing in through the lounge window. "Here, they've got a dog," said the first man, whose name was Stan. How did he know his name was Stan? As he shone a torch in Jake's bewildered face. "That would explain the sign on the gate," replied the second man, whose name was Eric. Again, magic. As he tumbled headfirst through the window. "What sign?" asked Stan, who could not read. "The one that said 'Beware of the Dog,'" said Eric, putting his cap back on his head. "Nice doggy, good doggy," began Stan. He approached Jake, who cocked his head to one side and wagged his tail. "It's okay, he's friendly," said Stan. Eric tiptoed over but didn't see Jake's blanket strewn across the middle of the floor, and fell flat on his face. Jake licked his ear. "Get off." Like get off, but get off, because I have a feeling spoken British. Yeah. "Get off," said Eric, trying not to laugh, even though he was rather ticklish. "Shh," Stan said, and then pointed to a cabinet in the corner of the room. "The family silver," he added, rubbing his gloved hands together. Jake stared inquisitively at the two men. They looked rather odd in their stripy jumpers and peculiar masks that covered their eyes. He wanted to bark, but of course he couldn't. So he just watched as both men began to fill a large sack with Ben's dad's golf trophies. There we go. Jake instinctively knew that this wasn't right. Strangers tiptoeing about in the middle of the night, helping themselves to whatever they fancied. He ran towards Stan and grabbed the seat of his trousers firmly in his teeth. "Get him off me," said Stan in a loud whisper, but Jake wouldn't let go. Eric grabbed the dog by his back legs and pulled until there was a rip. Stan's trousers tore to reveal a pair of red and white spotted box shorts. Eric landed with a loud thud on the floor. "Shh," said Stan rather too loudly, but upstairs no one stirred. Jake ran round and round in circles. He knew he had to make a noise, so he opened his mouth to bark, but all that came out was a weak little whimper. Then everything went black as Stan threw the blanket over him. Jake wiggled and squirmed and wiggled until he saw a scrap of light appear. Then he wriggled towards it until his nose peeped out. "Up there," said Stan, pointing to the top of the piano, just as Eric grasped the magnificent silver candelabra. Jake leapt onto the piano stool, and then onto the piano, trotting up and down the keys, and creating the loudest and most terrible noise imaginable. Within seconds, every light in the house seemed to be switched on, and the sound of footsteps could be heard on the stairs. "Run!" shouted Eric, dropping the candelabra and the contents of the sack on the floor, and the two men fled through the open window. When Ben's dad opened the lounge door, he couldn't believe his eyes. The sack lay discarded on the floor, with all his prized golf trophies spilling out of it. When little Jake ran up and down the piano keys, wagging his curly tail frantically, Ben and his mum came into the room. "What on earth happened in here?" asked Ben's mum, looking worried. "It seems we had intruders," explained everyone explains a lot, bloody hell, Ben's dad. He walked over to Jake and scratched him behind his ears. but our guard dog here raised the alarm. Ben and his mum ran over to congratulate the clever, courageous little puppy, and Jake played an encore, dancing up and down the keys until everyone was laughing, holding on to their ears and begging him to stop. "I think," began Ben's dad, lifting Jake down, "I prefer Batch." So, that was one story. And then we'll find another one. What else have we got? Let's go for the flying contest. Again, really pretty illustrated for beginning pages. It was a hot day on the African savannah when the animals saw that a notice had been pinned to the trunk of a tree. They gathered around to read it. Grand Flying Contest. The animal whose machine flies the greatest distance wins a round-the-world balloon trip. Judging by ostrich takes place at 12 noon. The animals stared at the poster in bewilderment. "Ostrich is doing the judging, eh?" gawped Lion. "What would he know about flying? Why, he can't even fly himself." Lion's voice was drowned out by the sound of an aeroplane passing overhead. The animals looked up at the sky, and one by one they began to have ideas about how to build their flying machines. "What a flying machine needs is a noisy engine," thought Hippo, as he trundled away to the river. "No flying machine is complete without a tail," thought Giraffe, as she galloped across the plain. "The most important things on a flying machine are the wings," thought Lion wisely, as he stole away through the grass. But Ellie the elephant just couldn't think of how she could possibly make a flying machine. Ellie was dreadfully forgetful, unlike most elephants, and she had already forgotten what an aeroplane looked like. "It must have had wings," she thought, "so I'd better make myself some. Now, let me see." Ellie tried to remember which creatures she knew that had wings. "Ah, yes," she squealed. "A flamingo has wings." So she started making herself a pair of wings. She collected all the feathers she could find. Then she stuck them together and stood back to admire her handiwork. "Something's wrong. Ah, yes, of course. A flamingo's wings are pink." Ellie busily painted the feathers with several coats of pink paint. When they were dry, she strapped the wings to her back, climbed to the top of a nearby hill, and took a running jump. Well, she was still running when she reached the bottom. She hadn't taken off at all. Phew. Ellie thought hard. She needed something else to turn herself into a flying machine. Now, what else does a flamingo have, she wondered. That was it. A flamingo has long, spindly legs. Ellie looked down at her own huge legs and sighed. They were far too vast for flying. Then she had an idea. She gathered 4 long, thin branches and made a set of stilts, or an elephant on thin branches. Okay. She practiced and practiced, walking to and fro on the stilts, but she could barely stand up straight, let alone fly. Something was still wrong. Then Ellie remembered. A flamingo has a curved beak. She found 2 large leaves and bent them into a curved shape. Then she painted them pink and fixed them onto the end of her trunk like a beak. But she still could not fly. "It's obvious," thought Ellie unhappily, "that I'm too heavy to take off. I'll have to lose some weight before Saturday." Oh, bless her. So for the rest of the week she gave up cream cakes and other fattening foods. It would be worth it, she thought. If I lose enough weight to fly, the day of the contest arrived, and the animals brought the machines out onto the savannah to show off their flying skills to Ostrich. There was a great deal of tittering as Ellie emerged. Ellie emerged from behind a bush. She was an extraordinary sight as she teetered along on her stilts, with her pink wings and her flapping beak. She also looked rather unwell. "Are you feeling all right, Ellie?" asked her friend Wildebeest anxiously. "Quite well, thank you, dear," replied Ellie, "just a little hungry." "Let's begin," snapped Ostrich. "Who's first?" She's got her beak and her wings. Seems doesn't look very well, does she, bless her? So, who's first? "I am," cried Hippo, leaping into the seat of his machine. "What a flying machine needs is noise," he shouted over the roar of the engine. It really was a magnificent machine. It looked a bit like a lawnmower with huge shiny pistons. There we go. "Isn't there something missing?" mused Cheetah with a smile. But Hippo wasn't listening. "Here we go," he cried, letting out the throttle as the machine shot off across the savannah in a cloud of black smoke. But it didn't take off, of course, because it had no wings. "Ha ha," laughed the animals with glee as it smashed into a tree, and Hippo climbed out looking disgruntled. What a lovely bunch of friends. "Who's next?" asked Ostrich. "Oh, I am," said Giraffe. "What a flying machine really needs is a tail," she said as she climbed into her machine. It was spectacular, with a gleaming metal tail standing proudly at the back. She cantered off across the savannah, 4 legs sticking out of the machine. Faster and faster she galloped, but she didn't take off because it had no wings. "Hee hee," giggled the animals, but Giraffe's legs got all tangled up and she collapsed in a dizzy heap. "Who's next?" said Ostrich. "Me," purred Lion smugly. "You foolish animals," he sneered. "What a flying machine needs is wings." And he leaped effortlessly into his machine. "I'm so tired." The animals gasped in awe. Lion's machine had a simply beautiful pair of wings stretching out on either side. Faster and faster went Lion across the savannah, and it looked as if his machine might really take off. He gave a great roar of triumph, and a fly flew into his gaping mouth. He coughed, lost control of the machine, careened off course and into a watering hole. "Ha ha, hee hee," bellowed the animals, as a very wet lion crawled out of the water. "Now what about Ellie?" said Ostrich, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. But Ellie was nowhere to be found. When she had seen the other animals' machines, she had been so ashamed of her own efforts that she had crept away. Besides, she was feeling very hungry. "I'll have a nice picnic of my own," she thought. She wrapped all her favourite foods in a tablecloth, tied it with string, and set off to find a quiet spot. 19. She was munching a delicious jam donut when suddenly there was a tremendous gust of wind. Before she could escape, she felt herself being lifted up in the tablecloth and carried high above the trees. She struggled to free herself, and then got all tangled up in the string. And then the other animals felt the gust too. They looked up into the sky and stared in amazement. They couldn't believe their eyes. Ellie was floating down towards them with the tablecloth and string acting as a parachute. "Ellie, you're the winner," announced Ostrich as she landed on the ground with a soft bump. The other animals cheered and cheered. "It's time for you to claim your prize. Bring out the balloon basket," called Ostrich. Ellie tried to squeeze her large frame into the basket, but it simply wouldn't fit. I'd miss you all anyway, she said. Why don't we have a picnic together instead? I'm still hungry as it happens. So that is exactly what they all did. The end. So, yeah, they were 2 kiddie stories. You can kind of tell that in children's stories they use adult scenarios or things that only the adults will understand. And reading that, you don't see it as a child, obviously, but when you read back on things, it's kind of amazing, because I doubt it was unwittingly done by the author, but you just skim over it as a child. So yeah, they were 2 stories. If you want me to do more stories, then let me know, I guess, because I have a few more stories in that book, and then I have some Winnie the Pooh books, and probably just some more storybooks in general. So yeah, if you didn't enjoy this, then my apologies, but you just wasted 21.5 minutes of your life, and you're not going to get that back. So goodbye, and I'll see you soon.